Today's webinar is Love or Hate Your Website and Its Design. We get a ton of questions about this topic, and so we wanted to dedicate about 30 to 45 minutes doing just a quick review with these guys and see exactly what are some of the best practices and what are some of the takeaways that you can do immediately with your own website, and maybe help you make some decisions as you look to either redo the website or how you might start to make some fixes and whatnot. If you guys do have questions, please put them in the comment boxes and we'll try to address them at the end in our live Q&A. As I mentioned, Ryan Anderson has joined us. Ryan is a partner and creative director, I guess, of Fluid. Ryan, you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and give us a quick background of your experience?
Sure. So I've been at Fluid for roughly about 5 years now, and before that was at a couple of different agencies along the Wasatch Front. And the way that I got into design was essentially I really liked to draw when I was younger, and because I came from a small town, I was one of the very few in that town that could draw, but that led me into an advertising class where I realized that you can put concepts and photos and illustrations together and really communicate on a different level than just one-on-one, which I really liked, and so that led me into advertising, and I've really enjoyed what the possibilities are with advertising and all aspects of that, from design to web design to advertising, and web design is what we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Ryan.
Yeah.
Frank, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Frank Imler. I've been working in web design for a really long time now. I started designing and programming websites probably in high school. I remember doing friends' websites and just playing around and mocking up silly websites for classes and friends and side businesses and things. And they never looked very well. But once I went to design school and learned some principles of design and got some experience in web design, then I was really able to learn how to focus and create really great experiences for clients. Past experience, I've been at Fluid for about 4 years now. I was with Richter 7 about 3.5 before that, and before that I worked for a few other small agencies in southern Utah, where I went to school at Southern Utah University, and so now I'm here and we're doing great things at Fluid.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely think we have two true experts on this topic, and so for those of you out there listening, you're in for a real treat, and I think that you'll have a lot of gems to take away at the end of this. Quick housekeeping. As usual, you can follow us on Twitter. Our hashtag is FluidWebinarSeries. If you want to send us a direct response, you can tweet at us at GetFluid, and we'll be live tweeting the event as we go as well, and so follow along there if you would like. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to these guys, and we're going to talk briefly about how Fluid does web design and the 4-step process that we take. Frank, Ryan, you guys want to take it away?
Yeah, so today we want to talk about not just about web design, but basically how you can make your websites really great. And we have a 4-step process that we use for the entire duration of how to start on a website design and how to finish it and get it ready for the developers to take it off. And nowadays there's lots of talk about responsive design and how to design mobile first, and those are all really important things you have to take into consideration, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but really we want to just talk about how you create a great experience online. And so at Fluid, we really try to design a system, not necessarily a hard set layout.
Like a template.
Yeah, like a template, because they have to be able to work on lots of different sizes and viewports. And so if we create a system, then it ebbs and flows really well, and things go a lot more smoothly for everyone.
It's actually kind of interesting. I've talked with my team, and even from a content marketing strategy, we have a monthly template that we work off of, and what we've actually found is that gives us more creative freedom, than when we're actually trying to problem solve through the whole process.
Yeah.
And so we actually think of some of the problems earlier on, and we're able to solve them, and we're able to come up with more creative solutions by kind of having that structure to begin with, rather than just going, you know, full bore, however it's going to work. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Going back to web design is a process that has changed from the early 90s, and it's changing more and more rapidly now, just as technology changes. The way that people develop online is changing as well. But back in the 90s, I think the mentality of most designers were, what are the options that we have to us, and how can we add all of those bells and whistles into a site to be impressive? And as we've evolved, as I was discussing, really what we've started to do is look at the needs of the user more than the design. And the user experience has become the most important aspect of designing on the web, where it used to be, let's see how much we can design. It's now, let's see the experience that we can create and how to make it the simplest and easiest form to get information online.
Now, when you guys are talking with clients and doing prospective meetings, are you finding that companies are actually recognizing the difference in, or the switch from the design to the UX, or are they lagging in that? Where do you think the client and users are at from their mentality at this point?
Well, I definitely think that they are definitely getting it. I think people have been talking about this whole responsive and mobile design for long enough. I think they really understand that you really can't control the user experience. The user controls their own experience, and whether they choose to see your site on a phone or on their big screen TV at home, you really have to be able to cater to their needs. And statistics are out there, and you'll find that you have, what, a few seconds of attention time to grab someone's attention and direct them to where you need to go, or else there's so many other options that they can go, they will go somewhere else. And so we really need to cater to what users need and not necessarily what we think looks cool.
And I think it's really, where do you want the audience to go when they come into the site? The question shouldn't be, well, here are all the options that we need, but where do we want to take them? What's the thing that we want them to do when they come to the site? Whether it's a call to action of any sort, or exactly where you want them to go. Make it easy for them to find. And that's why having digital marketing involved in any design is so crucial and important, to make sure that that user experience is ending up where the people that are creating the site want it to.
Absolutely. And this whole webinar could be considered an olive branch of digital marketing to creative, as we slowly find, how do we work together to achieve both the different goals of the creative and the beauty and the aesthetics, with some of the digital marketing goals of conversion and things of that nature. And so I think for those of you out there, it's not unusual to butt heads in these two sections.
Sure.
But I think it's more about just coming to a compromise, and from a business standpoint, what do you absolutely need to have versus what are your wants, and what are maybe later on things that you could add to it. And so how do those two departments actually come together? And that's something, as you look at things, maybe you're talking with your marketing department, and then you have a web developer and even an IT guy, getting them all in the same room to have a conversation at the very beginning of this would be really helpful, so that you avoid some of the pitfalls going down the road, and then just make sure everybody knows what the goals are, so that they can be cohesive together.
Yeah. And I think this is a good time to bring it up too, but designers, I think when they're designing a site, they're not usually thinking about the digital marketing aspects of that, the SEO that needs to go along with it. Link building, keywords, I mean, content, all of that is important to having people find the site. And if you're just designing without any of that in mind, then users won't come to the site, and they won't even be able to find it. So it is important to think about every step along the way to get people to the site.
Absolutely. Tell us, guys, the website's hierarchy of needs. You want to just go through each of these four real quickly and explain them to everybody?
Yeah, so we've come to realize that, you know, either the user or the website itself has a definite hierarchy of needs. And, you know, the most important need here on the bottom, where you would find, you know, all your important food groups, if this is compared to that, is the user's needs. You know, the website needs to cater to the user's needs. The user comes to a website, they're there to perform a task, and it's our job to help them perform that task. Secondly, clarity. There needs to be a clarity in the navigation. There needs to be a clarity as to how to perform that task, and the user needs to be able to very clearly understand how to do that thing that they're here to do. Consistency would be next, where it needs to be consistent with other websites that are out there. Now, we definitely have to push and be creative and come up with new things and be trendsetters, but also we need to have some sort of consistency with how other websites work. For example, people need to know that the search bar is probably going to be on the top right-hand corner,
Right,
because that's where they're used to looking for it. Also, if you throw in some unique things to your website, you need to be consistent to the entire website so that they can know and plan where to find those call to actions or those unique functionalities throughout the rest of the website, and it's not new and different on every single page.
And then, so Frank, while you're talking about it, you mentioned, the logo being on the top left corner. How important is that?
Well, I've definitely, in my years, have tried to stretch and to push and to break the bounds, and I've definitely have learned where to be outside the box and where not to be outside the box. I think in terms of the logo being at the top right, I think that has become
top left.
Top left. That's extremely important. People would just know that's where they need to look for it. The navigation needs to be at the top somewhere. We are seeing sites where there are along down the side. I think it's definitely case-by-case basis as to the needs and the usage of the site. But I think those fundamental things are probably pretty critical.
Yeah, I would agree, but I do think that you would find several designers and possibly even clients that feel much differently as well.
Sure.
And that's where this business is so fun, that subjectivity is such a big part of it. But I agree, consistency, whatever people have come to expect is going to move them through the site more easily.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then the last piece, it's where all the sweets are, is the beauty of the site. It's the aesthetics. It still needs to be engaging. It still needs to be entertaining. They want to come. You want your viewers to come back for more. They want to be able to share it and show off how great of a site it really is. Later on, we'll talk about surprise and delight. They need to be able to enjoy themselves while they're there. It doesn't need to be a dry, boring experience.
Sure.
I do like the way you've set this up, though, in the food group chart, because it does show really well what is most important.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are important, but what needs to be considered first.
Right.
And I think it's something else you need to put yourself in your users' shoes.
Right.
So many times we build things the way we want them, and you're actually building a website for somebody else. So when you almost look at all of these, who are you thinking about? Is it your user's needs versus your actual user needs? And I think that gets mixed up a lot, where, we're talking about our company and what we need, and really it has very little to do with you.
Sure.
It's about somebody else. So try to make sure you put your mindset with the correct group.
Yeah.
Well, and you bring up a really good point. It is important to understand who will be coming to the site and the demographic that you're catering to. And if you don't know that and you only think you know it because you own the company, it might be worth having a research study conducted
Absolutely.
about really how do people perceive your company, how do people perceive your current site, and are there fixes that need to occur?
So the first step that we take is we sit down with the client, we meet with them, and we really want to focus on two main things at this point. We want to learn all about the company. We want to learn about, most importantly, who is going to be on this site and what they're supposed to do. So we're going to make a list of goals for the site. We're going to find out what those key performance indicators are. We're going to learn how we're going to know we're successful if we've met those goals. And so once we get a really good understanding of those two things, then we can go ahead and proceed with the design of the site. And usually the first step that we take is to build a site map. And a site map, it basically is, it's a map. It's a overarching document that shows here's how the navigation is going to line up, here's all the important pages, and we're going to try to map how the user is going to flow through the site. So, and we're going to align that to the goals and the needs of the user. And here we have an example of a sitemap that we've done recently for a banking client of ours. They were really interesting. They said, we don't want to look anything like a bank. And so they're a very unique client where they focus more on lending to commercial groups, and so they were very unique from any other bank that you would ever meet. And so you can see the very first thing in the architecture of the site and the navigation is loans, because that's what they do. They provide loans products for their customers, and so we were able to, knowing who their customers are, they have segments of who they want to reach and who the new people they want to reach. And so we've segmented that, and we've created pages for that. And also, what if they already know what they want and they don't need to find out who they are? And so we've created, you can go straight to specific products, and they can just, we can tailor it straight to their needs. And then the rest of the site is kind of the other things that they do, and we've, tailored the architecture of the site to accommodate for that. But here we're really focusing on who is the user and what do they need to do, and we've designed a sitemap around that.
Well, I love this because I think segmentation, and even part of that first step in the research phase, is, are you supplying a client, a company or an agency or whoever is building your website with the different segments that will be coming to you? Right? So often we say, we just want a website, build it for this, here's the different sections we want, but we've never actually sat down and said, these are the different audiences that we attract, and how do you make a consistent website that has to be so unique to so many different groups?
Yeah.
And just having identified that in your research phase, you can really plan to do that by using simple and consistent navigation types of things, and so kind of letting them self-select. So I love to see these. It also makes for a more advanced website, so it's more scalable for the years down the road as different marketing technologies continue to pop up. This type of a website can plan to take advantage of those, and kind of talking about website personalization, marketing automation, a few of those different tactics that are really becoming popular now. By having those audiences well-defined in the beginning, can really lead to your ability to employ those down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
The thing I like about the sitemap stage is it's completely utilitarian. You're not worrying about the aesthetics of a site, the design at all. You're not letting any of that come in and complicate the process. It's really just looking at how do people navigate through the site. And it's necessary. It's a fundamental stage, and it's always good to start with something like this to keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Well, it's a glorified org chart, right?
Sure.
And I think that's really what's important. Some people don't understand with websites, there's actual hierarchy to them. As you get deeper into the site, you're getting into more product or service specific pages, whereas your home page will be more of a generic and general site. And so Google actually needs to understand what is the most important part of your site for some specific topic. And you need to actually guide the hierarchy, and that's done with basically the URL structure and sitemap, but then even within H1, H2, H3 tags, letting it know, this is the area of importance. And so building out a sitemap of this type will really help you identify what is our hierarchy and how do we want Google to start to read things as well.
Yeah. The next part, and this gets overlooked almost every time, is content first. By this stage, which is the very beginning stage, really need to have the content identified and even written for the site. I found this quote by Andy Fitzgerald. He's a writer that you can often find on Smashing Magazine, a website that deals only with web design and web user interface design. He says, content is the core commodity of the digital economy. It is the gold we fashioned into luxury experience, the diamond we encase in loyalty programs and upsells, yet we often plug it in after the fact. We prototype our interaction and visual design to exhaustion, but accept that the real words can just be dropped in later. There is a better way. And there really is a better way, and that is, if the most important thing of the website is to provide content, then really we need to start with the content. That needs to be designed first. So it's important to get copywriters involved at the very beginning, get your digital marketing team involved at the very beginning, and really outline, what is it that we're going to provide, how we're going to provide it. And also at this point, it's good to bring in good copywriting. We need to establish a tone of voice, making sure we're on brand, that we're talking to the right people in the right way, and have this all outlined at the very beginning of the web design process.
Well, and to add to that as well, and it almost goes without saying, but one of the most important things of having content first is it actually saves the client money, because so many times a designer will allocate a certain amount of space for a particular block of copy, and if that block of copy gets much longer or much shorter, then that whole area needs to be redesigned, which then takes a lot more time. And if you start to think of a site that has, you know, dozens to hundreds of pages, and that needs to happen several times throughout a site, suddenly you're adding more and more hours just to the design phase of the site, which takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens in the development phase as well, which takes even more time.
Sure. It's going to have to be redesigned and then reprogrammed, and it's just very inefficient.
Yeah, I think this is probably the single most important part of the whole presentation, and you guys may or may not agree with me on that, but it's just incredible how we expect creative and dev teams to come up with something when they have so little actual information about what it's going to say or the message that needs to be displayed. And out of percentage, could you guys guess how many, have we ever done a content-first site? Have we ever been able to get to that point?
Very few, sadly. Usually the content comes, you know, during the development phase, or it'll come at the very end of the design phase, which, you know, brings up surprises. Every once in a while, we do get, you know, all these Word docs saying we've written out the site, let's design it to it. But right now I'm working on one, which is really nice. But it's probably 80% is without content first, and probably 20% actually provides the content up front.
Right. And then how many people are, you know, just moving the content they currently have into a new design?
Right.
Is that happening a lot, or is it most often there's some new copy going into it?
I would say about half. Half the time they just, you know, copy and paste out. They might change a few things, but they just say, well, we've already written it because we already have a website.
Right.
Well, your
And,
website
you know,
was
whether it's right or wrong, a lot of times it's done and they consider it to be done, even if it does need some modifications. So yeah, Frank's exactly right, half or maybe even a little more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also, and this is with the digital marketing aspects of that, it's the content is important to Google and what each area says, and making sure that it says the right things ahead of design, like we've already talked, just saves time, rather than trying to fit the square peg in the round hole afterwards on what it needs to say, and making sure the right words and content are there to make sure that it shows up where it should in Google search results. It's just a good practice to have all that nailed down before the actual design phase.
Absolutely, and even when we talk content, I'm pretty sure everybody right now is thinking about the outward-facing content, right? I mean, this is what I'm reading on the page, but at least when I hear content, I'm hearing all the meta tags and all the descriptions that are so often sites are launched and just don't exist at all.
Yeah.
And that stuff is so, in a way, I mean, first you have to be found, right? And so that content in and of itself almost is more important than what's on the page, because nobody ever gets to the site itself, it really doesn't matter what it says on that site, right?
Yeah.
So we almost have to think of content like what are the meta descriptions of every page? What are the title tags? So there's a whole secondary piece of content that should really be looked at and should come as content first as well.
What is going to tell search engine that you deserve to be, you know, high up in the search results?
Yeah, and so many people have not done that step correctly. A new website really gives you an opportunity to focus on that and get it right this time, and the immediate lift of it can be exponential.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So then the second phase we call the UX phase. We've done the research phase, now we're doing the UX, or the user experience. And this is probably one of the most important parts to spend the bulk of your time on. If you think about building a house, an architect plans it out, he draws it, he works out all the kinks of what could happen in the construction. You don't just call a foreman and just say, okay, start building, right? So you do that same thing with the website. And so here we're going to be creating these, you know, boxes basically, and we're planning out the space on a website. In the next slide, we can see some examples of wireframes we've done, where they're literally just boxes, where we can say, this is going to be a header section, we needed to say this, we need to have a call to action that will lead into this. And you can see in the middle option, they had a video prepared, and so we knew this is great, we're going to have a video overlaid in this section. And so really, this is where you're really planning everything about the website, and you're really getting the right features and the right content on the right pages, and it just makes everything go so much smoother afterwards. So some things to remember while you're wireframing is when you're planning things out, do your best not to make your users think. They need to be able to just assume, if I go here, I'll probably find where I'm looking for there. You know, we really don't want to make people search, and we can really nail that down in the wireframe. Second, we want to make sure that we're creating clarity with this visual hierarchy that we've talked about with content, with, you know, where things are at on the page, how the navigation is formed. We need to make sure that we really make things very clear. And then we want to be consistent with patterns. And patterns is really outlined in the wireframes as well. We can follow the patterns of the general web by saying, you know, the logo goes over here, the search bar goes over there, but then we can establish patterns. We can help users expect where to find call to actions. We can say, you know, there's always going to be a call to action after this type of content, or there's always going to be a video in this section of on the page. And so we can develop a pattern which makes it more usable. And so these are some great things to be remembering while you're doing wireframes. And also, it's super important to make sure that the website copy should be written by this stage so that you can plan your wireframe around the copy that you've written.
How often do you think third parties, not the client or the builder or anybody, is actually looking at the wire?
Third parties, what do you mean by third parties?
Like getting, you know, your relative involved or somebody that hasn't seen it. I feel so much, you know, you dig into this stuff and it makes sense to you because it's your world, it's your, you know, vocabulary, and it's kind of your step-by-step that in a way you've already been part of. Do you think many people are actually looking to the outside world to be like, hey, does this, if I showed you something like this, does it make sense?
I don't know. I've never actually asked the client that. That's a very good thought. We always try to involve, you know, the digital team and the development team at this stage to make sure that everyone's on board with what we're doing and planning. But it definitely makes sense to, you know, at this stage, show it around and make sure that even this makes sense. Because if this stage doesn't make sense, then once we start adding all sorts of pictures and colors and things, it'll just complicate it further.
Yeah.
You know, to answer your question, I think that people that are sitting in a boardroom are the ones that are seeing this, but I don't think it goes much beyond that. I doubt they're taking it home and showing spouses, family members this stage, but I almost guarantee they are at the design stage.
Yeah.
They do like this at that point.
Yeah. One thing we do talk about, and not nearly often enough, is testing. And usually people don't test until it's developed. And then they start going through, doing Q&A, make sure everything, links work and everything. But really we should be doing testing at this early at the stage too, with maybe user groups or focus groups, things like that. So smart thinking. After this stage, we usually jump into the third stage, which is the user experience, and this is where all the designers get excited. Usually the client gets excited by this point because we're talking about things that are more easily relatable. Sometimes I've found that clients get a little frustrated when we spend week after week on wireframes because they're really not seeing anything that they can relate to. But once we jump into this stage, and they get a little more excited. And so we usually do user interface design by starting with a style tile. And if you design a house, you will call in an interior designer, and she'll or he will have like this big board, and it'll have carpet swatches and paint swatches and textures and colors and things. And you can say, I kind of like something like this and like that and like this. And you can start to really plan out what the inside of your home is going to look like and create a mood with that. You can do the same thing with style tiles. In the next slide, we can see what style tiles look like. But here we want to make sure that with the style tile, we're really defining the system that we talked about at the beginning. You know, we're talking about color palette. We're talking about what the headers look like. We're talking about, you know, H1 through H6 if we can at this stage. And you can see from these two different style tiles that, you know, we can really make the website speak differently one way or another, and we haven't even started laying out the website yet. We're using different typographic styles. The fonts say different things. We're treating the buttons differently. We're using patterns in one. We're using a background image to create a texture in the other. And so it really creates a different mood and a feel. And so, the reason why we do style tiles, back in the day, we would create maybe 3 or 4 homepage concepts, and maybe even secondary or tertiary pages, and then we would either get them Frankenstein together, or the client would say, I like this way, and then we'd take 2 options that we created, and we would just throw them away. The client paid for that work that we just threw away.
Wow.
But on this one document, we can define, you know, the system of the website in one document, and you can very easily decide, you know, I like A versus B better, and then you can design really only once.
Mm-hmm.
And so some key things is remember, you're trying to define the system. You're creating a visual language based on your brand guidelines. So here you're really creating the mood. You're speaking the brand language at this stage. And you want to make sure that you're working on efficiency. You're trying to make sure that how you're outlining things is simple and easy for the user to be able to understand and navigate through. And then after this stage, you can even say, here's how this would look with a homepage concept. So you're you're minimizing what you're designing before you make major decisions at this stage.
I love that option of the colors. I mean, that's kind of one of the things for me is always, I feel like when I'm talking with the clients, color just hits you so hard. And to see the different designs, when you're not in love with something, sometimes just mixing the color palette a little bit can make you fall in love with it and be like, okay,
Sure.
I really got it. And so having this ability is kind of neat, I think.
And typically, you know, we'll start with the colors, and they'll be the brand colors. But a few sites ago that we worked on, it was for an attorney's firm, and we added in a red color, which wasn't part of their brand, but that's what we used for highlights, and especially for call to actions. And it worked well with their brand. We were able to contribute to their brand a little bit, but it really was a nice, you know, new thing to add to the website that maybe users wouldn't be expecting because they're used to seeing the same colors as often. So it's a nice way to kind of explore the look and feel of the site before you really get into the weeds and spend a lot of time.
I'm just glad to hear you support the big orange button.
I do like orange buttons sometimes. The next stage would be build, and so really here's where, you know, the rubber hits the road. We're designing, and we're really laying out the page and really bringing everything together. From the style tile, you kind of saw how, you know, here's how we'll relate images and copy together, and here we're really putting it in a layout that users can see, and they can make sure that it fully works. So you have to remember, you're designing with this system. You have to wait for things to break down when it goes to responsive mobile design. And to help with that, we usually use a 12-column system where we can kind of plan out where things might break down as the screen gets smaller, so that the experience is still seamless, which is really important. Also, we have to remember during this stage that first impressions really do matter. Like we said earlier, when the client gets to when they land on your page for the first time, you have seconds to be able to prove to them if you're going to provide relevant content or not. And this is where you plan on doing that. It's important to remember that aesthetics really do add quality, and then it really is recognized by your industry and your community, and it really is needed to get like nice little graphic elements on the page, whether it's you treat the photography differently, or perhaps you add like little ornaments or things like that on there. It's really important. And then you really want to add the surprise and delight factor to animation and rollovers, things like that, so that when clients aren't expecting something and you entertain them with, you know, maybe the color changes, or maybe like the button morphs into a different shape, or you provide a video where they weren't expecting it, then it really is, you know, providing that memorable experience that adds to your brand and keeps clients coming back to your website.
And I really like how you've talked about it's like building a house, and there's the conceptual stage, there's the blueprint stage, there's the picking all the colors, But eventually there's the living in the house stage, and that's, once the site goes live and you start to experience, this is how you go through the site. And a lot of times they'll call the first iteration of that the MVP, not the most valuable player, but the minimum viable product.
Right.
And that you start to recognize that maybe there are certain things that we should have included, that maybe this would work better here, and you can evolve the site and create, modify, change as you're actually living in the new house.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So when you're looking for, maybe some aesthetics, qualities, or, graphic elements to add to your site, I have a list of things, and we can add. I should have provided them, I'm sorry, but some websites that we like to reference to see what the industry is doing is maybe awards.com, which is awwwards.com, or behance.net. It's a good way to see what the latest is in web design trends. The FWA, the Featured Website Association, thank you. They are always bringing up the latest and greatest things that they find, and some great things is their awards, and the FWA not only recognizes great design but also great development as well, to make sure that those features are really working well and are really cutting edge, so it gives you some great options there. Pinterest is another great way to kind of do research and see what's out there, what's good. Another great thing, if you're looking for little interactions with animation using CSS or JavaScript, is to go to codrops.com. That's CODROPS.com. It's provided by a company called Timpanis. And they're really cool because they'll do articles where they'll say, here's some cool ways to have hover states, and then they'll do several demos, and then they'll provide the code on how they did that. So it makes it really doable, right?
Yeah.
You can see things and it's like, wow, I wish I could do that, and then like, right there's the code, so now I can just take it and I can use it for myself. And it's a great way just to elevate the overall quality of your site and what you're providing to your clients.
It's fantastic. And for all those listening, this is a recorded webinar, and so we will send the recording to all of our sign-ups, and we'll go ahead and include some of those links that you just mentioned for all those if you want those after as well.
Yeah.
One thing to mention at this point as well is getting the developers involved really early as well. There used to be a line of thinking that a website would stay in design until the design process was over, and then we'd kind of toss it over the fence, and then development would take a first look at it there and try to match what had happened in design. But it was a very inefficient way to build websites, and so getting developers involved right up front and describing what's going to be happening, talking through some of the issues that maybe designers wouldn't be thinking about, but developers would say that could be an issue down the road. Getting them involved as early as possible really helps with not only budget, but timelines and effectiveness of the site.
Yeah, and I would even say bringing in digital marketing as well. Lots of times I'll bring a site to Dustin and I'll say, what do you think? And he'll provide, some feedback on where call to actions should be that I had never even thought of, or maybe I totally overlooked, social icons and sharing things, and I just didn't even think about that. So it's really good to build it as a team. Like I said, it's not a conveyor belt mentality anymore. It's a team that's building this website. Awesome. All right, so I have a few principles, things to remember while you're going over the website. Is first of all, make it highly intuitive. Like, it has to be self-explanatory in a very obvious way. Remember, we're focusing on the user's needs first and foremost, and we want to make sure that they're performing that task as you want, because maybe that task is, a transaction, and if they can't perform a transaction, then your website is totally useless.
If somebody gets frustrated on the site, they give it very little time before they bounce.
Yeah.
And we have tools and things like this. I mean, that just alone is so true in the fact, and I actually sat with a client earlier this week and said, have you ever actually walked through the funnel yourself? Have you ever bought anything on your page? And they were like, yeah, kind of, but ultimately they had skipped a few pages because they had a promo code and they had a way to get through. And it's like, but that's not how your user's going to do it. Like, have you ever actually walked step by step? And ultimately they said no. And by using some of the testing tools that we had, we were able to find a page that wasn't really working. And so a lot of people were getting stuck, and they were wondering, why do we have such a high bounce rate on this and stuff? But it was because they never really gone there and touched the page to see if it worked. And so I do think that it needs to be intuitive, and even once it has been designed and sent to active, you still need to come back and make sure that it is intuitive from actual functionality versus just concept.
Yeah, totally. Next, visual hierarchy. You know, they need to be able to see how to perform the task. We create that visual hierarchy with typography, with warm colors versus cool colors. Really, the design elements are coming into here. We're providing great layout, you know, big, small, medium-sized things. We're really, because we can't like hold their hand while they're walking through their website. We really have to create a visual guide to help them, you know, lead their eye and guide them through without actually talking to them or providing video or audio and like, okay, click here next, click there next. And we also do this by providing a grid-based layout, so it's very easy and simple, and it breaks down easy when we have to move on to different screen sizes. You know, it has to be simple, right? We can't have complicated things to get in our way. Even the call to actions have to be simple. The architecture has to be simple. You know, if we provide lots of choices, it's going to be harder for someone to choose a choice. It's easy to choose between A and B, but it's harder to choose between A and X, right? There's so many choices. I have to now do research, and then I'm probably going to get frustrated and lose my focus. So whatever task you want your user to accomplish, everything has to be designed around performing that one simple task.
Well, and that experience needs to be consistent on a 27-inch monitor or on a mobile device.
Yeah.
And it can't be identical, because what's going to look simple and be easily intuitive on a 27-inch screen is going to be much different on a mobile device. But the experience that they have needs to be consistent and needs to feel like the brand that they've come to expect. And that's why keeping it simple and making it easy is so important.
I think keeping it simple, too, just yells, you know, mobile and the next step. So many complex things are going on a desktop that simply can't be done on a mobile device. And with most people accessing websites through their mobile at this point, the more complex you make it, the harder it will be for dev. And you might be creating a more expensive site that down the road just really isn't translating to the different devices.
Totally. One thing I forgot to mention about grid-based layout is when we use the 12-column grid in our websites, there's a great tool out there called gridpack.com. It's GRIDPAK.com, where it helps you identify the column system, where if you want 6 columns or 15 columns, you can really define that, and then it'll provide you a PNG, which you can put in your, you know, Sketch or Photoshop or Illustrator, however you want to do it. That helps you line up your guides to create your 12-column system to design to. Man, life.
Are you saying Gollum?
Gollum, yeah.
We are talking about something very precious. I do think also some of these topics might be a little above the heads of some of our listeners, but if anything, I think this is so important because it gives you what you should be looking for in your web developer. These are some of the questions. So simply, you know, you don't maybe need to go and do the grid yourself, but just understanding that there is a grid and that there is a resource for this. And these are some of the questions you can be asking people as, you know, you are looking to have a new website designed. So just take everything with a bit of a grain of salt, and how can you utilize these things to make sure your experience just goes that much more smoothly.
Sure. The last few final thoughts is, you know, typography is so important in web design. It's probably one of the most important things, because if the content you're providing is the main nugget of your website, then to make sure that how you're laying out that type is really important. It needs to be engaging. It needs to make sense. Interaction
and readability,
for sure. Interaction. you know, we need that surprise and delight. We use that to help guide the users, also to reward them when they did something right. You know, they need to know that they're doing right things,
Yeah.
and usually we do that by changing a color or making a box get bigger, or something needs to happen in order to help users know that what they're doing right is what's right. You know, test early, test often, have lots of different people and to seeing your website and your design through the whole process to make sure that you're you know, taking care of problems now rather than after it's live and you're having problems. And then last of all, you know, make the developers your friend. You know, those who are actually helping you produce the site, whether it be web developers, those who are going to be managing the site afterwards, and testing it and making sure people get to it. You know, they all need to be your friend. You know, they're responsible for the end result ultimately. You know, as a designer, I create this document and say, okay, go make this, right? And then really it's up to developers and digital marketing team to take it and actually produce it and make the thing work. So they have to be involved through the entire process. They also, I found, are a great source of ideas. You know, developers know the greatest thing in code and features, and like I said before, Dustin, you've helped me see a lot of things I've overlooked a lot of times. So they're always a great source of ideas, and then make sure that you're you know, involving them through the entire design process.
Fantastic. I think there's just so many good nuggets in that, and then we will follow this up with a web dev presentation as well. So for those of you out there who want to get more into the actual development, but today we wanted to focus on design. Before we jump into questions, I wanted to just quickly show everybody some tools that we want to just kind of show you some of the things that we use on our end. And so what you're seeing here is, this is a heat map, and so when we build a site, so many people trash their old site and just go with the new one, but they don't really take out the information that their old site provided them, because there's obviously things that worked, right? At least in most cases. I guess you've seen the site that just scrap it, but in a lot of ways there's always the site and like, this went really well. And so prior to just scrapping your site, we can put different tools on it to kind of learn how are people engaging them, and then back to the consistency, your website at some point trained people to do something. And so when they come back to the site, they now have a learning curve, and that can be upsetting to them. And so we have to make the new learning curve as short as possible, but try to put in as much of their previous behavior into the current design so that it's not this total 180 on them instantaneously. There's obviously reasons to do both, but whatever you can take from the other. So I'm simply showing you here, this is a heat mapping image of or test that we did, and what it's showing you here is this particular view is called the heat map, and so it acts as though your mouse is like a magnifying glass, and so as long as it's sitting on the screen, it starts to burn into that section, and then if you click, it gives more credit to that. And so on this particular page, you can actually see that people are using the breadcrumbs to go back, and then they're also using the different drop-down areas, and they actually do want to read that. And so some of the takeaways that we might garner from that is, instead of leaving this detailed section that people seem to be clicking on and wanting to see, can we just have it already be out? So it's just one less click for them, and they get the information that much quicker, and they can move closer to the cell. Moving down, we see some of the different options. So in a way, looking at it, looks like they're looking at the images. So a lot of this page is actually really well designed. And so, but as we come down, we notice that there's not really any action going on below. The next one that I want to show you is a scroll map, and this is one I really love. I think it's really telling of how websites work, but so many people want to put so much information on a web page, and they don't really understand that people, A, don't read much anymore, and B, they don't really scroll or move around. They're looking for what they're looking for, and if they don't find it quickly, they're going somewhere else. And so what you're seeing here specifically, and there's a little grid here on the right, but the white section means 100% of all the visitors that came to this page saw this. And in this particular example, they've done a pretty good job of seeing what I would call the above the fold, and we all know the fold line is kind of moving and or non-existent anymore. I argue there is a fold still, and that's just what displays on your device at any size. But in this particular one, you can see pretty quickly that less than 50% of people actually made it to the call to action. and even fewer made it to any of these related products, almost 0 to 25% of those people. And so what that means is we're missing a big opportunity to upsell, and we're also missing an opportunity just to actually make the first sell. And so we can use this information to show designers, hey, let's move that call to action up a little higher, into that details area where they might be reading it, and then the brain says, let's add it to cart. And if they're not seeing that, maybe they're shopping longer than they should be, and we're not actually able to move them into the process. So anyway, that is just one of the really fun tools that we think is important. And then the last one is there's such thing as A/B tests, and with some of these, and it looks like this one hasn't loaded for whatever reason, so I won't show you that today. But within an A/B test, there are different programs that you can utilize that will show you, without actually making development changes, if you were to make this change, would it have a positive impact? And we often want to use that before we go to the development team or the design team to say, this is what we really want. We want to let that user decide. And so that's part of that user-generated conversation that we were having earlier that I just wanted to accentuate. Before we move on into the questions too, just over the next 2 or 3 minutes, I want you guys just to speak really briefly to mobile, designing for mobile versus desktop. I think that's a really huge topic that I wanted to cover. Can you just explain how these differ for you?
Yeah, so all along the way, especially beginning within the very first phase, is we understand the user's needs, which is, will they be on the site predominantly on mobile, or is this the kind of site where they kick back on their iPad when they're laying in bed at night? Or is it the kind of site that they're on their desk at work and they're buying and interacting with the site, on a desktop? And usually that kind of information can be provided at the very beginning. If not, we need to go find it and figure it out. While we're designing, while we're doing the wireframes, and while we're doing the design layout, we usually design a mobile, a tablet version, and a desktop version. Now, the tricky thing about that is you can't just, design for iPhone, because not everybody has an iPhone. Plus, every iPhone seems to be getting bigger or smaller these days.
Right.
And, there's so many, going outside of Apple, there's, all the Android users and the BlackBerries and the Windows, and they're all different sizes. And like we said earlier, you can now, push your site to a TV, and, does it look good on a TV? And so really we design these systems to be able to expand and contract. And so we usually design and plan out these wireframes with that in mind. And then when we design systems, not necessarily a website, so that things can move in and out and move around, we're trying to predict where the breakpoints are. And then while development has the site and they're developing it, they can alert us of any issues, because they're testing it while they're building it out, and they can say, look, it's breaking really weird here. What do you want to do? And then we can step in and we can make those decisions and make sure it's a seamless system and experience for anybody.
And there's a lot of things to consider too in terms of the smallest size that it could be displayed. Is the logo going to be big enough? Is the font going to be big enough? Yeah. Is the clickable area for a finger going to be comfortable enough that they're not clicking on something above or below? They're actually able to, trigger whatever link that they've clicked on. The other thing is the stackability that you talked about, is realizing that whatever's on your site, if it's on a 27-inch screen, eventually that's all going to need to cascade and stack in a mobile device. But still, as we mentioned earlier, have that same experience that they've come to expect from the brand.
Yeah, and a lot of people will design the site on a mobile viewport first, because that way it forces you to make sure that the most important things that the user is going to need is high in the hierarchy, so they can get to it easier. And then you can go out from there. Some people don't even do it traditionally anymore. They don't really design it anymore. They just design these little systems, and then they just start putting it together on a desktop. I think that's very unique, and it's a case-by-case basis. But you really have to understand how the user is expecting to use the site, and then you plan and design from there.
Absolutely. And mobile-first design is definitely a big buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it could be as beneficial as it also could be a trap in the right case. And
Sure.
so I definitely think one way for you to know, do I need to do mobile site specifically? Does it need to be mobile first, or is it going to be responsive? How are we going to do it? Is just to simply go into your analytics, and on the left-hand sidebar, there's an actual section called desktop versus mobile, or then it's called mobile. But look at that section, and it will quickly give you a breakout of how many of your visitors are coming from which device, and even break it out into tablet, and so you can actually kind of see how important is it to us at this time.
Right.
But I do think that mobile is a huge thing. The other consideration I have for mobile is what is the different usages. I mean, if I'm on my phone, it's pretty well known that the 75% of the time we're searching for a company at this point, we're looking to call that company. It results in a phone call. And so if your phone number is in the footer of your site, if I pull that up on mobile, do I actually have to thumb through the entire thing to get all the way, and how many times do I have to scroll? So that could be a negative experience for the mobile user. Additionally, location is obviously a huge thing on mobile. We're looking for directions and things of that nature. So are those appearing? And then even in the way that they're appearing, like we noticed for a client today, we had a really fun vanity phone number. It was 888-8888, cell or something fun to that effect. And that was how they actually had the number displayed. And then next to it, the letters SALE, the numbers that represented those letters were actually on the side of it. But because it was in that different order, we were unable to do push to call because it was trying to call a word. And so all we had to do was flip the numbers and then put the vanity thing next to it, and then the click to call worked. But how big is that for somebody using a mobile device that now has to key it in? I mean, do they get in a car accident? Do they, unfortunately, we are doing these things at the wrong time. And so making it easier can also lead to making it safer. Definitely. And so there's some major considerations. So think, how is a mobile user actually using it, and what information do they need versus a desktop user who obviously has a lot more time and will, play around a little bit more.
Right.
Well, guys, again, thank you enough for the presentation. We did have a few questions come in, so if you have about 5 more minutes, we'll just go ahead and begin our Q&A.
Sure.
Give us just one question. You guys can continue to follow along as well. Just give me 1 second. I'll get this launched for us. Okay, our first question was simply, and I think this is a pretty common one, but how often do I need to redesign my site? I'll throw that to either one of you guys who wants to answer that.
That's a good point, and we brought up earlier that technology is changing at such an advanced rate than it ever has before, that unfortunately, almost as you're launching your site is becoming obsolete already. And so I don't know if you can put a hard, fast timeline on that, but it probably depends on how much technology you're putting into the site. And one thing that we did when we launched our site is we realized that we needed to start designing the next iteration of the site at that time. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, the thing I love about web design is that it's like a living, breathing thing almost. You're creating this experience, and so you're always going to have to be updating it, managing it, and I think it's an ongoing process for the entire life of the site. As I would say, as soon as you start to become, dated, even the content in there needs to be refreshed often. And so it's definitely a case-by-case basis, but I would definitely do it every few years for sure, making some sort of update, some sort of change, whether it's a complete redesign or maybe it's a refresh. You need to always be managing it and keeping it fresh and updated.
I almost feel like you can feel it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like people really start to, you can just look at it and it feels outdated. And, you hear that it's every couple of years or so. And I think that's fairly common just with the speed in which digital technology is going. But I do think it's a case-by-case basis. And you'll start to hear people around the office start to harp about little things. And as that, chatter grows and grows, maybe it's time to look at a redesign.
We can always compare it too. Like you can, like those sites that I provided earlier, like how does my site stack up to the competitor site? Does he or she look you know, more new and trendy and up to date and more high tech than I do. How do I just stack up to the web in general? Like those sites will show you like what's the latest and greatest thing and where sites are moving to, and how do I stack up? And if I'm obviously if I'm behind, then I need to make a change so I can always be relevant.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good answer, guys. Next question, is there a cheap way and an expensive way to design? My company doesn't have a huge budget. I would imagine a lot of our listeners and just people out there really are trying to do web on a budget. What suggestions do you guys have?
Well, one thing, we developed this 4-step process because we were, you know, wasting a lot of time, like throwing hours of work away, and so we have developed this process, and it actually makes it a lot easier to do, and it can be tailored depending upon the size of the budget that is required. There are sites out there that can help you build a website, and that you can still somewhat follow these principles. If you need to use, you know, third-party website builders like WordPress or Squarespace, things like that, I would definitely try to come up with a customized experience as often as you can. But of course, budget only allows you to do so much. So.
Well, and I think it's all dependent on the usability. What are people going to use that site for? And if there's an e-commerce aspect to that site, it may be more expensive than what an online brochure version of a site would be. And so it all depends on what a particular client is looking for too, in terms of, but yes, every site has a cheaper way to do it and a more expensive way. And like most things, the cheaper way will look a bit cheaper, and the more expensive way will function a bit better and look a little higher usually.
One quick cheat on that, I think, goes pretty universally for us, is do your own copy. Yeah, that's an expensive part of the copywriting, and you're probably the most knowledgeable person about your site and what you want to say. And so if you can do, you know, even just a large majority of that, then a lot of the times when you go to a custom build, the copy is a built-in expense. And so if you can actually supply that, there's, you know, one small section that you can get, whereas the design's probably not as easy to discount and get the quality you're wanting.
And going with that vein too, you could use stock photography instead of hiring a photographer to provide imagery and content, things like that.
Cool. Awesome. Next question, should we design with a template site or build from scratch? So kind of going into the same thread. I don't know if we've answered that. Anybody have anything to add to that question?
You know, I have one thing to say on it is if you don't have money for a custom-built site, templated sites are great ways to go. A lot of times people can recognize that it was built from a template, but having a site and having an online presence is much better than having nothing. And so I'd put it in those terms that, yeah, a templated site sometimes looks like a templated site, but that's all you have budget for. That's better than nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
And the last question, should I hire a freelancer or a business?
It definitely depends upon your budget. I think a freelancer would probably be a little bit less expensive. The advantage of going with a business, not to be salesy, but for something like Fluid, is that you have a design team, you have a development team, and you have a digital marketing team. You know, so you're getting more than just what one guy can provide. You know, I freelance as well, and I hand my site off, but you know, it would have been up, you know, maybe a little bit better had I been able to have an entire team around me. One of the things that makes our design team unique is that, you know, we share what we're working on every morning in a meeting with all their other designers, and so you're not getting just one guy working on it. You have, you know, all the other designers that are there every morning looking at it and giving us feedback and critiquing and making sure that, you know, even just the design is working well. So when you hire a business, you get, you know, I think you get a lot more bang for your buck.
Well, and Frank brings up a good point. Freelancers can do it a little more economically, but you look at everything that goes into making a website, from the digital marketing to the development to the design, all of that together, you would need, there's probably not one freelancer who can accomplish all of those things. You're going to need to hire several freelancers, which complicates the process. If you're looking for an easier way to do a site, typically that's going with a company, an agency, or hiring those individuals in-house that can work collaboratively and create the site.
Sure.
And I have to agree completely. For me, it's all about the headache. You know, part of hiring a freelancer, hiring anybody having a website is to take some of the burden of sales and representing your brand off of you and letting that digital presence come in. And if you're going to have issues with it all along the way, not have somebody to contact, some of those problems will maybe become a larger headache than it is worth the savings. And so, again, we are all a little bit biased as we are in the agency, but many of us even freelance and build sites for other people, and you're getting what you paid for. And if you have a business that you're expecting to run into longevity, you probably want to go with the higher end thing just to get it off your back and make sure that it works, because that user experience, if somebody comes to the site and it doesn't function perfectly, that's really, really negative, and that means they're not coming back. And so you may have just lost that core demo that you need to impress so badly. Mm-hmm. And so for me, there's a risk reward, and I would always just want to make sure I put my best foot forward. And where your website is probably the first thing people will see about you, I would take the time and I'd hire a group that could really work through the UX, the UI, and then troubleshoot everything thereafter. So.
For sure.
But again, it's up to you. There are easy out-of-the-box, you know, there's the Weebly's and the Squarespaces of the world. Anybody can go out and make your own website. And again, to Ryan's point, I think having a presence is the single most important thing. But secondary, how do we really impress the people that we're going after? And I think that's the major goal of the website. So, guys, I think we've reached it. I want to give a big thank you to the creative department here that joined me today on today's Fluid Webinar Series event. As always, again, you can follow along with the live tweets that just occurred on our Twitter page, @GetFluid. You can also direct message in any follow-up questions that we may not have answered. We will see you guys next month, and thanks again.
Thank you.